Pets assignment is sort of the superheroes assignment on steroids. Instead of just having a superheroes class, we're going to create a pet class that will then be inherited by a dog class and a cat class. We're going to create instances of both of those by reading in data from an external data file, and we'll be able to add new pets, list all the pets, list all the dogs and all the cats, show the details for any one of the pets based on their ID. We can search for a breed, and we can also adopt a cat out. That's sort of how we remove a pet from the list. So in the instructions, I give some further screenshots of what your program will look like in terms of adding a dog or a cat to the, in this case I called the list the kennel. Being able to list all the pets in a columnized format like we did in the superheroes. Show only the dogs or the cats. And then each pet has a ID tag associated with them. You can enter that ID tag in and see the information about that particular pet. We can also search for a particular breed and then adopt an animal out, again based on its ID. Here are the UML diagrams for our three classes we're going to create. The pet class will contain the name, the gender, the breed, and the birth date, and the ID of the pet. That's going to be common between dogs and cats. But dogs have some special things that cats don't have. Are they housebroken? Do they know basic obedience commands? Are they good with other dogs? Or are they good with other cats? The cat, on the other hand, the question is it litter box trained? Is it good with dogs? And is it good with other cats? Each of them will have an initializer. In the pet class, we'll have a get random that's going to randomly generate that ID when we add in a new pet. We'll have accessors for all the attributes, mutators for all except for the underscore ID, and then we'll use an LT dunder method for sorting all the pets by name. In the dog, we'll have the init, the accessors, the mutators. We'll have a string dunder str method to print the pet info with the dog title in front of it. Show the dog details is another method, and then save the text record back out. We're just going to write that data for dog out to our data file. Same thing for the cats. Actually, this should say show cat details rather than show dog details. And also write out the cat record to our data file. And then finally, there's the rubric for self-assessing how you did on this project. Once again, try this on your own. And if you struggle and need help, then come back and watch the rest of this video and I'll show you my code review. I'm going to start with the pet class and the inherited classes of dog and cat, and then we'll look at the main program. So in the pet class, I've got a pet.py file and imported the random class. My class is named pet. Here's my initializer, and we're going to accept values for name, gender, breed, birth date or birthday, and the ID. I call it my ID here. I give a default my ID of none. So if we don't specify an ID, it becomes none. Now if we're reading the data in from a data file, it will have an ID. But if we're creating a new instance where the user's entering a new intake of an animal, the ID is not going to be there. We're going to need to create that ID. So that's where the none will come into play. We're going to set the values for double underscore name, so it's an encapsulated property. And if gender.upper equals M, or if it equals male, we're going to set the gender to male. So this gives us an option of, if we want to just kind of do things quickly, for gender we could type M or we could type male. Otherwise, we'll set it to female. Set the breed and the birthday to those values that are passed to it. Here's where we're going to create a new ID. So if my ID equals none, then self.double underscore ID equals self.create random ID. And notice the parentheses after here. That's a method. We'll look at that here in just a second. Otherwise, we'll set the ID to my ID. So here's our create random function. Our ID is in the format of 3 letters and 4 numbers, and those are going to be randomized. So I have a string variable called letters, which equals the letters A through Z, and numbers 0 through 9. And then my ID is going to equal letters, and I'm going to take a random number generator between 0 and the length of letters, -1. So that'll make these all inclusive. I won't have a value that's outside of that range. And it's going to randomly then take a letter from A through Z. We're going to concatenate to that a second letter and then a third letter. And then we'll concatenate at random for the numbers. So here we're taking the length of numbers rather than letters on that 4th character, and the same with the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th. That's going to generate a 7-character ID where the first 3 characters are letters and the last 4 are numbers. We're going to return that ID. Now here's my mutators, where we're setting those values. So setting the name, the gender, the breed, and the birthday. We're not going to set the ID. We're not going to let the program change the ID. We're only going to randomly generate that initial ID and then never change it. But on the accessors, we want to include the ID. So we've got name, gender, breed, birthday, and ID. Then I have that LT dunder method where we're going to return self.name less than other.name. And again, it's going to be a -1 if the self is less than, be a +1 if the self is greater than, and it'll be 0 if they are equivalent. So the sort method that's built into Python will use those values in sorting the instances of our pets. Next, I'm going to create the dog class, and it's inheriting from the pet class. So my initializer is I'm going to get the same things, name, gender, breed, birthday, and here I'm going to add in, is it housebroken? Is it obedience trained? How's it do with dogs? How's it do with cats? And then we'll do the my ID. And that my ID, again, will equal none. So we're overloading the my ID here, so it needs to be last. We're going to pass the name, gender, breed, birthday, and my ID to our parent initializer, and then we'll set the values for those that are unique to the dog class. Again, a bunch of setters, my mutators, and my accessors. And here's our string double str underscore method. We're going to return the word dog, and then I want to return the name, the gender, the breed, the birth date, and the ID. That's going to create our column formats going across. So these are being left justified by a certain number of characters. Here's where we're going to show the details. We're going to return the details to our main format and let it print these values. So I'm putting in some carriage returns here. We're going to print those out as multiple lines of text. Saving the text record is going to write all of this information back out to our data file. And we want it to be in a tab delimited format. So I have the word dog, and then each of the attributes of the dog, including those that are inherited from the pet, being written out in tab delimited format. So I'm concatenating tab characters between each of those items. That's the end of the dog class. Here's the cat class, pretty much the same thing. The main difference here is we're setting litter box, dogs, and cats for the cat, and then passing the other values to the parent. Mutators, accessors, and then we have a string method here. Here we're going to put the word cat, and then basically this is kind of those same things, the name, the gender, the breed, the birth date, and the ID. And actually you'll notice the ID is going to go here in the second column on both of these. So we want the ID up front in our column format. So just pay attention to that. It can be 4, 0, 1, 2, 3. So the 4 is going to relate to the ID, whereas the 0 is going to be the name. Showing cat details, kind of the same thing we do with the dog, and then the text record, again, writing all that information back out in a tab delimited format to our data file. Let's take a look at the main program. So here is my main program. I'm importing pet. That's going to get me the pet class, the dog class, and the cat class. My main method here is we have a global list called kennel. Starts out being an empty list. We're going to read the data records as a method that's going to take the data from our data file and populate this kennel list. We're going to make the choice a question mark, and then while choice is not equal to X, that's our sentinel, we're going to provide this menu. Since it starts out as a question mark, it's actually going to show the menu, and then it's going to get a value from the user as an inputted value going into choice. Since while choice is not equal to X, we can execute each of the different menu items, A through H. So here's our show menu. Just a bunch of print statements. I put the word menu at the top, and a carriage return to precede that, just give a little spacing. Here's our add dog, and I set a default name of Serenity, and so while the name is not null, so I want to start with just a name in there. Serenity is my dog. So while the name stripped out of all spaces before and after is not null, then we're going to ask the user to enter a dog name into the kennel. So enter a name, enter a gender, enter a birth, and then we'll ask them, is the dog housebroken? Is it obedience trained? And here we're asking them for entering a Y, an N, or a U. So a U would be unknown. Asking them if it's good with dogs and good with cats. And I notice I create a little value first, and then in the while, if it wasn't one of the values we're looking for, it asks for that. So we're setting a pre-value that causes the while to execute at least once. If they don't press a Y, N, or U, then that loop's going to repeat until they do so. Once I've gotten that information, I can then append to my kennel list a new instance of pet.dog and pass it those values. And then I can call the kennel sort method, which is going to use that LT underscore method to put all the pets in alphabetical order. So my new pet's going to appear somewhere in the list where it belongs. And then I'm going to auto-save the records. I'm going to write all that data back out to my text file anytime it changes. I'm doing the same thing with the cats. So here's the add cat. The only difference here is we're asking if it's litter box trained, if it's good with dogs and good with other cats. Same process. Here we're going to append to kennel not pet.dog but pet.cat and pass it those values. Again, sort the kennel, auto-save the records. Here's our list all routine. Simply going to go through our kennel list, and it's going to print first the headers for our table we're creating, some underscores, which are actually going to be equal signs. I just think they show up a little bit better. And then for animal in kennel, for each animal, we're going to print the animal. That's going to call the str method for either the cat or the dog based on what type of object it is. Here's where we're going to list just the dogs. And pretty much the same thing, except for we're going to go for dog in kennel, and if we're going to use the is instance method to make sure it's a dog, and then we're going to print that dog. It's going to ignore all the cats. Opposites happen here with list cats. We're going to use is instance method to make sure it's a cat. Here's where we're going to show the details. So we're calling that show dog details or show cat details based on which kind of object it is. And if it's not a dog or cat, we're going to say the animal type is unknown. That should never appear in this case, but if for some reason our data, somebody went in and played with our data and they put a fish in there, we would get this animal type is unknown. If it didn't find the ID that they entered, then we would say that record was not found. Searching for a breed, we're going to ask them to enter a breed to search for. We're going to print a listing of those breeds. So we're going to go through the kennel list again. We're going to get the breed using our accessor for each pet in our kennel, put that into ABC, and we're going to compare that to what we're looking for in the find my breed. And if it does not equal a -1, meaning it was a match, we'll print the XYZ. If it's not a match, that's going to be a -1, and it won't print the item. We're going to increment a variable called results to show at the end how many matches there were. This line of prompt equals 01 as found could be substituted here for the literal phrase prompt. We could put prompt there. You could actually eliminate that line. We don't need it because here's where we're formatting the 0 and the 1 as a result and my breed. So it might say, 3 boxers found. When we're going to remove an item from our list, we're going to use the adopt out method. Again, they're going to enter an ID and we're going to go through our list each item at a time and see if it's a match. And if it is a match, then we'll adopt it out. If it's not found at all, then we'll say it wasn't found. Here's what we're reading in our data records from the data file. We're going to open that data file. We're going to read each record. We're going to read the first line. And then while the length of that line is greater than 10, I mean, there's sufficient data there to process it, items equals records.split. We're going to split it on the tab character. It's going to go into an array called items. And then if item sub 0 is dog, then we're going to append to our list calling the dog initializer and passing all the values from our items array. That was the tab delimited items. But if it's cat, then we'll append the pet.cat items to our initializer. And once again, otherwise we'll say animal not found. We're going to close our data file, say the data has been loaded, and if something goes wrong, then we'll say something went wrong. Maybe we couldn't find the data file. It's gotten deleted from our folder, and we'll specify what that exception is. Here's where we're auto-saving the data file. So data file equals, again, our open kennel.txt. We're going to open that for write purposes rather than up here we did read purposes. And for each pet in our kennel list, we're going to write out the pet.save text record. And that's going to call that save text record either from the dog record or from the dog class or the cat class. We'll close our data file and we'll tell them that data was updated. Again, if something goes wrong, then we'll inform that with what the exception was. And then finally, of course, we need to call our main function to get this all to run. So let me run this. So I'm told here the data file has been loaded. So let's just list all the animals. And I'm going to stretch this out a little bit. So there's all the animals, both cats and dogs, alphabetized by name. Let's show just the dogs. So there's all the dogs. We can do E for all the cats. So we have more dogs than cats in our kennel. If I press the letter F, I can specify the ID of a animal. So I'm just going to pull this one here, a BLM 1815. That's Snickers. Snickers is a Maltese. And Snickers is housebroken, obedient, but not good with other dogs or good with cats. If I press G, I can search for a breed. Let's look for a boxer. And I come up with two boxers. Brutus is a boxer and Slash is a Roddy boxer mix. So it says two boxers found. If I do H, I can enter the ID of an animal. Again, I'll do that BLM 1815. And I'm told that Snickers has been adopted. So now, if I look at all the dogs, you'll notice that Snickers is no longer in that list. And if I shut my program down and come back to it, Snickers would not be there. It's been deleted from the data record as well. So we haven't added any animals, so I'm going to add a dog. My dog's name will be Cosmo. Cosmo is a male. Golden Retriever. And we'll say Cosmo was born on 08/12/2017. Housebroken, yes. Basic commands, yes. Good with other dogs, yes. Cats, I'm going to say unknown. Now I don't want to add another dog to the kennel. I'm just going to press blank. And let's add a cat here. So we'll do B for adding a cat. I'm going to call the cat Chewy. Male. Himalayan. Put in a birth date. Is the cat litter box trained? We'll say yes. Good with other dogs? I'm going to say no. Good with other cats? We'll say yes. And we've added that cat to the kennel. I'm going to press blank to end. Now, I'm going to end my program here, pressing X, and I'm going to rerun it. So I close the program down, and I've got a little problem here. So what I'm going to do is go back and look at that data file just going to open it up here in idle. So I should have a data file here called kennel, and let's see what happened here. So the data file all looks good. I'm going to go back and look at my code for a minute. I'm reading in that data file. So notice I have dog and cat as uppercase. I probably want to do a if items.0.upper and .upper, and I'm going to run it again. Lost my square bracket there. Let's run it. So now the data has been loaded, and I can list all the animals. And you'll notice in my animals here, I now have Chewy the cat that was added in, and Cosmo the golden retriever that was added in. So the data is being persistent in my data file. If you just jumped into this video and haven't seen the prior videos to this, I invite you to check out my Python playlist of videos. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos that I create, you can click my picture up in the top right and subscribe to the channel.